When life throws you a curveball, how are you going to handle adversity? Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast, where you're about to go on a journey as I interview security, business, and entertainment leaders on what it takes to stay fearless. I'm your host, Mark Ledlow, and enjoy today's episode. Another question I had, do you guys do threat assessment, risk assessments? Because that's the big corporate verbiage for, companies being current and the risk, corporations. And I hear that's the big thing that a lot of companies do is risk assessment, threat assessments. And that's something you guys are a part of, or you guys mainly on the behavioral side of the science part of things?
Are you talking about physical security assessments?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we do that as well.
Okay, good enough.
And again, in our, I don't want to say our twist or our angle, but we try to incorporate, I guess, our unique value proposition on that space is, again, we recognize the value that physical security brings to prevention. So I can use cameras, I can use access controls, I can use lighting, safe parking areas to help protect someone who is being threatened. So there's a tremendous value in incorporating physical security into behavioral threat assessment. But the unique value proposition that we bring is that when we do a physical security assessment, we're also looking for behavioral components, right? I did that in K through 12. So for example, you approach, I enjoy doing this quite a bit. I would approach a teacher and ask them about emergency management protocols. What would you do if this was happening? Okay, under that scenario, the teacher would know what to do because they've been brought to training. But when I approached a custodial staff member or a cafeteria worker, they had absolutely no knowledge. They're just like, well, I guess just take off running. I'm not sure. I would lock myself in a closet. So I saw that as a missed opportunity where instead of leveraging every employee as a member of the safety and security team, there was this cadre that was pre-selected, right? And we needed to reframe that to ensure that every single employee viewed themselves as a member of the safety and security team. And that included, custodial workers, cafeteria workers, bus drivers. So thinking beyond the classroom. I going back to my my corporate experience, if you're at a C-suite level, people are trained up really well on some of the procedures because you're right there at the C-suite. But that needs to extend to every single floor in your building, every single department, because you need to maximize your workforce so that they see themselves as a member of the safety and security team as well.
Wow. It's like in schools, right? Bus drivers.
Yep.
Spend a lot of time with kids on buses. 911 operators, when you call for an emergency or you need some help, that's a frontline defense.
Absolutely.
So we really need to think about everybody who is positioned to be able to possibly help. And we use this saying in trainings that we've done when you're thinking about, well, who do we need to train? Who do we need to bring on the team? Who needs to be involved? I like to, humorously say, find your zookeeper. And people are like, well, look at you, kind of funny. Well, I say, you think about zookeepers. What are they great at? They work with animals. They know when an animal is sick, angry, hungry, potentially going to attack just by subtle changes in their behavior, as opposed to some oral communication like, hey, I'm going to come eat you, the direct threat, which we don't always get. I think we all need to be better zookeepers and find those zookeepers wherever they're positioned. It doesn't matter who they are. And no matter what you've read about who are the right people to put in a team, you're going to see standard templates that say, 5 or 6 traditional roles.
Right.
It needs to be anybody that you need at the table who's in a position to help, regardless of what their role is. So getting that word out vastly, and not missing those people that, and I think it makes them it almost sends this message to them like, you are not as significant as a member of our community as other people. And I wholeheartedly disagree. Everybody plays a role. When I worked in a hospital, there is a different type of value between the cardiothoracic surgeon and the janitorial custodial staff. But if you remove one of them, there's a service that's missing and the whole operation can't function.
Absolutely.
So which is more valuable?
Wow. Genius. That's true. They all they're a byproduct of each other to function in that environment cohesively. I had I think it was Fred Burton that was on a podcast representing Ontic. I don't want to misquote what he said, but I thought he said something to the fact that we've had more school shooting in the U.S. than actual domestic terrorist bombings in the U.S. And I'm like, whoa, I think he said, think about all the school shootings. If I were anything, I'd be focusing on school, security programs and the need for those programs to be beefed up, because that's where the biggest threats in the U.S. are. But then, I don't want to misquote what Fred said in that podcast, so I'd have to go back and re-listen to that. But what's your guys' thoughts on that case study of domestic terrorist hits on the U.S. versus U.S. school shootings? I think my numbers. I mean, did the FBI statistics on that? I'm sure there's more school shootings than domestic terrorist attacks in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, even with even on the when you have maybe an ideological angle, right? Those are you're not seeing that as much anymore. You're usually seeing someone, even if they adopt an ideological cause. We had that incident in New Orleans, right?
Yep.
That is an act of terrorism. Someone was showing allegiance to a foreign terrorist group, but this is not like the olden days where somebody was traveling to a particular location where that foreign terrorist organization is operating. They're getting training. They're going through this process, right? We're seeing people who, maybe they go online or they adopt an ideology and they do something, and that can happen rather quickly. I call that, maybe loose ideology from looking from the traditional view.
Right.
But again, it's an individual who's not doing well, right? The common denominators are someone who's isolated, someone who has kind of doesn't really have outlook. They're often suicidal, right? They lost visibility of hope, right? And they have ineffective or very compromised coping skills, and they get sucked into that idea that violence, right, is the only way to fix the problem. You're dealing with people who completely gave up on hope, right? There's three potential outcomes if you're going to become an attacker for whatever reason you decide to do, whether it's a school shooting or an attack like we saw in New Orleans. You're going to end up arrested. You're going to commit suicide at the end of the event, or you're going to be killed by law enforcement who are responding to the violence that you brought upon people. So again, there's really no positive outcome. And I think that with the school situation, why I said that the threat landscape remains very elevated is because we're missing opportunities to get ahead of problems, right? After we, and you could say, hindsight is 2020, but the reality is, if you're trained, this is especially troubling. Like Matt and I, when we learn about the maybe certain people wearing symbology that's associated with school shooting, or they're communicating, they're telling people what they plan to do. Communication is a key component of human behavior. Humans communicate kind of like dogs shed hair, right? It's just a necessity.
That's
and
true.
We often hear that people are receiving information that if you could intervene and get ahead of it, perhaps you could have prevented a tragedy. I've been involved not just with the school shooting, but I've also been involved with cases where we had someone who was on a pathway to violence, who was planning to do horrible things, and we're able to intervene and put the person in a good path, right? It's almost like flipping a light switch in a very dark room where hope and visibility of a good future was totally absent. And through creative, individually tailored approaches, you get that person to, like, a light bulb goes off, and they realize that maybe that wasn't the best way of going about things. But for us to activate the light switch, right? It's kind of like a vehicle. Before your engine fails, usually there is a engine light or some kind of trouble light, and people often ignore that, right? Oh, it's no problem. It's probably this, it's probably that. They keep driving, and that leads to a bigger problem. And that's exactly how it is. We know that these warning behaviors and warning signs are often present. We just don't always capitalize on them, and that's something that Matt and I are trying to change.
Wow. And I think you guys are doing amazing things in this industry, and probably could change the world for the better with what you guys have going on with Koi. Matt, I wanted you to give us a case study of a positive experience you had when you're dealing with a gang member, or you're in the prison. Something that just was a positive experience that you got into, maybe gave someone hope in a gang member, because I know the gang members are all their identity. That's all they have as far as identity. And then this basically, if they don't do what the gang tells them, they're dead pretty much. And so
Sure.
I've dealt with some gang. I used to work for the Oregon Youth Authority as a correctional officer, so I dealt with some of them too in my younger years.
Yeah. I'll share a story with you. I don't know if it's going to speak to all of that specifically, but
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
tell you how the message I said earlier on this recording, where I said, sometimes it's about just, getting to the human side of somebody and asking them about what their family is, to them and what matters to them or what they're interested in, and getting to the human side versus what was your crime or, what are you in for? I mean, they were hearing that all the time, and they just became very conditioned to say that. But I took those words of advice, during that. It was a graduate program field trip. I was in a forensic social work course, and we went to the jail, and I heard that wisdom from an inmate. So I took it with me for the rest of my career. And it would be several years later, I was working on those units, the 23-hour lockdown units, and we had 3 floors. And I forget how many cells, but it was, you just don't forget the smells and the sounds and,
No.
and the visuals. It sticks with you.
It does.
It's not a place for humans. And some people may say, good, that's where they deserve to be for things they did. But there are a lot of people who deserve better circumstances and ways that we could address it. That aside, I was called down to the unit. It was a Monday evening, I believe. That's usually when I worked one evening, kind of second shift, and would do my rounds. And my goal was to just get them, when I would go over, to not tell me to get the F away from their door. Get the hell away. I just wanted them to be able to at least say, I'm okay, no problem. Because we had to go door to door. And it was sort of like this really, really, for lack of a better term, pathetic way to do a quick assessment because of the high risk nature of that environment. We literally saw people lose their minds because of the social deprivation and being locked down. So I really tried to think, what would I need? What would I want? What would anybody just need? And it was the thing I kept coming to was some sort of mental stimulation, just to keep me going. So I started just bringing printed copies of word searches and Sudoku puzzles and simple stuff. No staples, it's contraband. But you could bring paper, and I couldn't give pens either. But, they had the little rubberized pens that they could use. And when I first started coming over on those Monday nights saying, hey, would you like this packet? It was still, get the hell away. But all it took was one person who was curious to say, yeah, let me check it out. And it was fortunate that it was one of the highest. He was at the time the highest ranking member of a particular gang in the Northeast. And he was interested. And I think it was just about, let me see what I can get from this guy. I'll take this, and then let's see what he can give me next. That's fine. I'll take it. I don't care if that was a manipulative tactic, because I know how to hold my own with boundaries. So once he did, it kind of set a precedent, right? Follow the leader. And then I would come back week after week, and progressively, I didn't get those, get the hell away from my door. I would get the, oh, do you have more? And that was a really cool start. Well, this ended up saving my life. I was called down on one evening. They said, hey, this guy who I knew well from several years of working with him. And they said, he's really agitated and we don't know what he's going to do. He's going to go off. And in that culture, once you start, you got to finish what you started. It's all about reputation and saving face with the, with the gang and whatever the particular thing is that you have to do. So I went down, I go onto the unit, the doors, steel doors open, the gates, you go in, they shut behind you, that clanging, you don't forget, because you're stuck essentially, unless someone chooses to let you out. I go to his cell door, and to kind of draw an image for people, just picture this giant slab of steel with a small little square where that is their window, scratched up so you can barely see through. And then there's a little door at the bottom we call the wicket. It's like the food tray slot that just flips open at the bottom. So that is open, and I'm looking through this really fuzzy visual of him, and he's pacing, very small little area back and forth. We had a pretty civil conversation. He never yelled. He never screamed. And I just asked him, I said, hey, is there anything I can possibly say to you right now that's going to make a difference? Or do you just have to do what you got to do? I was respecting his position, respecting his situation. I'm not trying to make him do something otherwise, but just kind of preparing for, hey, do I need to do something to be safe here? Or what's the best way to kind of de-escalate this, even if possible?
Did he want to kill you?
And what I appreciated at the time was that he didn't.
Did he want to kill you?
He wasn't doing. Huh? What's that?
Did he want to kill you in his cell?
No, he was cordial. He was pleasant, and engaged. And I said, okay, when he answered, no, there's nothing I could do. I said, all right, well, I hope you're going to be okay. That was it. Not about don't do this because the officers don't. It just, I hope you're going to be okay. I took about 3 steps away from the door and I just heard this whoosh sound. And what he did was there's a window in the cell that they can open. It's barred so they can't get out, but for ventilation. And when you open that back window with that food slot on the front, it creates a wind tunnel. And what he did was he very cleverly was able to create some sort of igniting source and just basically blew up the cell. So this huge fireball just comes straight out. The whole thing goes up in flames. However, they're brilliant. They got a lot of time to be creative. He had doused a blanket in water. So he covered himself with that and stood to the back of the cell behind where that kind of flume was coming out. So of anything later, he was perfectly fine. I was trying to get out of the tier as it starts filling up with smoke. The doors jammed. They couldn't get them open. So I'm stuck on there thinking that this is it for me. And I'm waiting for one of those scenes where all of the doors just start to open. And now I am on a tier with 30 something Latin Kings. That's what I was worried about.
Whoa.
I was able to get off the tier. Fast forward to the next day, I go back and I pulled out, I mentioned him before, the guy who is the highest ranking member. I was checking on him. Some of the guys on there had some smoke inhalation. I had some minor inhalation. I was fine. Nothing traumatic here, but the what could have been. And I brought him out, had them pull him out, sit him in a cell, and we're sitting face to face with the bars between us. I never liked that, but they would never let me do otherwise for safety purposes. And he made a comment to me. He said, did you notice that when you were talking to him yesterday, he waited for you to leave before he did what he had to do? I said, well, now that you're mentioning it, yeah, I mean, I'm cognizant of that. I wasn't really putting 2 and 2 together at the time. I said, yeah, I didn't think about it. He goes, yeah, that's because you've earned his respect. And you've earned all of our respect because every time you've come here, you've consistently just treated us well. You bring things over. You've never given us a hard time. You've never asked us about why we're here. You've never made us feel judged. He wouldn't do that to you out of respect. And the other reason is if he did do that to you, he would have to answer to the rest of us. Which I thought was a really profound and pretty cool, weirdly cool moment to know that, all right, I've got some executive protection in the firm of the Latin Kings right here to look out for me if need be.
Wow.
But I think the takeaway is that taking the time before it's ever needed to cultivate that positive relationship, to let them know that I don't care why you're here or who you killed or who you harmed or scared. At the end of the day, there is a person in there. Everybody's got something redeeming. Even if it's very, very hard to find, I think there's something good in everybody. And my job was to figure that out. I wasn't the judge and jury. They were already incarcerated. And the situation is horrible, no matter what people think. Oh, they shouldn't have this or that or TVs or Ben and Jerry's ice cream, which was a luxury at the prison I worked. And I can prove that. Well, it's an actual thing. And if you ever watch the movie The Town with Ben Affleck, they make a reference to Ben and Jerry's. And he says, why don't you, to his dad, go over to Norfolk and get some Ben and Jerry's? That was the prison where I worked that was referenced. It's where we'll say a former famous New England Patriot was also housed and some other interesting characters. But it just reminded me of the importance of cultivating those relationships and with people and always treating people with validation and making them feel significant. Because what do we see with these people that go on to commit these horrible violent acts, whether it's a school shooting, mass shooting? It's often just to feel a sense of significance and that they're valued. So
Wow.
I thought that was a life-saving, if you will. Maybe it's a little dramatic, a little hyperbole, but maybe it wasn't. It could have. I think I would have been fine, but it was a lesson learned that I've never and will never forget is let's try to get ahead of the curve. And that's what really inspired me to want to start to work with people from the prevention space versus kind of after the fact more so.
Wow. And that's a story that's going to stick to the audience. That's why I did that at the very end of this. It makes that emotional connection.
It will be a story. We have a lot of stories in a work that we are diligently writing. I think we're nearing kind of the end of this, and we're hoping to be able to create something.
Co-authored a book together, right?
That's what we're working on.
Okay.
We're nearing kind of, I think, the first.
Congratulations on that.
End-ish of a draft. Well, we'll take that once we get there.
Okay.
But we're trying to create something for the industry that no one has really seen, stuff that people have seen, but also when we sat down, we said, what is it that we wish people told us in advance? What is missing? What are people not talking about? How to do this work versus just the fundamental concepts. Concepts are great. It's important to understand them. I think at the end of the day, it matters more about how you operationalize them and what you do with them than it does about just knowing what they are. Right.
Wow.
So that's what we're hoping we can, do some good. And I think both of us agree that if our time were to come tomorrow or the next day, I think part of our legacy would be that we just left something original, something impacting on this larger community, and then we can be proud of it. And hopefully the people that we care about and that we love. And for me, my daughter, and I'm sure for Bruno's, well, they're grown up, but his kids too, to be able to say, hey, my dad did that. I think that's a pretty cool reason to want to do something good.
Leaving legacy. That's awesome.
Sure.
So as we wrap this up, folks, this is the Fearless Mindset Podcast, and you can find us on all the podcast platform and subscribe to us on the YouTube channel, Mark Ledlow, and we'd love to have the support. And please reach out to either Bruno or Matt if you'd like to connect with them, jump on a call. Bruno, where can people find you? On LinkedIn, I assume?
Yeah, we're LinkedIn. We also have a webpage. Happy to share that with you. Maybe not sure if you can share with others. And by visiting the webpage, you can get a copy of that free BTAM resource, which is very comprehensive. And you just ask for a copy, and we'll send you one.
Yeah, Mark, it's Key Operational Insights is how you'll find us on LinkedIn. KOIPartners.net is how you can find our website. And if you're interested in just emailing us for questions or inquiries about how we can partner up and work together, it's info@koipartners.net. So
Easy
pretty
enough.
Straightforward and simple. Yep.
And I'll have the podcast team put that in the notes so they can find that easily under the podcast when they publish it. So they'll make it easier so people can find you directly and email you. But yeah, folks, don't hesitate to reach out to either Matt or Bruno for their services, and they're live now and looking to help folks that want help and change the world for become a better place. Thanks for tuning in, folks, and thanks for supporting the podcast. We'll see you on the next episode. See you soon.